everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today's guest is fan Eric Creighton of Illinois. For today's episode, Eric picked a show that was an instant classic from a legendary tour, December 7th, 1997, at the Ervin J. Center in Dayton, Ohio. I know for a fact that this show is often cited as a top-tier show from one of the best tours in Phish history, but believe it or not, the only thing I knew from this show before Eric selected it was its version of Tube and its reputation. The whole show is a signature performance, but there's so much more to it than just the Tube. It includes also a top-notch version of Theme from the Bottom, a funky Possum, and, an AC/DC bag into Psycho Killer. But even more important than that, it was the best experience for me to hear Eric talk about what it's like to see shows in and around the Chicagoland area. Aside from one trip to the Windy City in 2015, I'd never seen a concert there. And between Northerly Island, UIC Pavilion, and even the Cubby Bear, Phish has such a strong history in Chicago that it was just a pleasure for me to listen to and to hear Eric talk about the band and his hometown city. So relax, witness the growth of Timber Hoe, brush up on your Motown, and watch out for Bart backstage as Eric Creighton tells his story about December 7th, 1997 at the Nutter Center in Dayton, Ohio. Eric, welcome to Attendance Bias. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Today we are getting into what I think a lot of fans would argue to be Phish's best tour ever, at least up to this point, the Fall 97 run. And today's show is a highlight of that run, December 7th, 97 at the Ervin J. Center in Dayton, Ohio. I'm glad you picked this show because before I listened to it thoroughly for our episode and our conversation, I knew it for one reason only, and that's Tube. And so there's so much more to this show. When I went on the Phish.in recording and Phish.net, I forget the exact number, but I think there's something like 18 songs played total, and something like 10 of them are listed on the .net jam charts. So this is obviously a high point in the tour, and I'm sure one could argue in the band's career. So I'm really excited to dig into it and really have this conversation and hear about your perspective of seeing it.
Yeah, I'm excited about it too. It was a show that meant so much to me in the realms of Phish with music and with friends, and everything about it is something that I cherish.
Great. Yeah, me too now after hearing it.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's dig right into it, Eric. Let's hear a little bit about you for the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Eric, when was your first Phish show?
So my first Phish show was in Tinley Park, 8/14/1993, which is a suburb of Chicago, and a horrible place to see a show. They went back there in '97. It's like a big tin box, and the sound is just horrendous. I've been there for a bunch of concerts. Unfortunately, the sound's never gotten better. But that was my first show. But it was kind of a show that I didn't really know a whole lot about. I just seen my first Dead show in March of that year. I didn't know much about the Dead or Phish. I mean, I did know Phish. I had Rift, but I had such a wide range of music at that point. Anywhere from stuff like Dinosaur Jr., the Pixies, Slayer, Pantera. It was, I was going to see a lot of different concerts at that point. And I think that's ultimately something, with Phish is the wide range of music is why they stuck to me so much. I love so many different types of music that, it's like, well, wow, these guys don't just stay in one genre. And eventually 94 saw a couple more shows, 95 went to college, and just, the obsession started.
Was there a particular song, whether it was on Rift or at that show, that grabbed you and kind of melded it all together for you?
I played guitar at that point, and I still do. Never nearly anywhere enough to be a professional musician, but I truly loved Rift as an album, because that's what it was. I mean, nowadays, like my kids, they download individual songs. I don't even know if they know what an album is, but, the concept of it is fantastic, and the songs just bleed together. And I loved every single aspect of it.
And that Tinley Park show was released as one of the early live Phish releases, I think, right?
Yeah.
Is it the
Yeah.
one that has Run Like an Antelope?
Yeah, the Antelope, the Mercy, Have Mercy. It's a fantastic show that I don't recall being at, other than the fact that wasn't very full. I mean, I remember the lawn being pretty scarce. It was a big step for them in the area, so.
That's exciting. I love that show. It was one of my earlier tapes. And then when they released the soundboard of it, even though the recording of the tape I had was pretty good quality, when they released the soundboard of it, I was just obsessed. That's something that grabbed me early about Phish, is their ability to weave in and out of a set list with a single song as kind of its base. And I think, is it Have Mercy and Sparks, or something like Sparks appears in that run, right?
Yeah. In all honesty, I think what I truly remember about that show was just how different it was. I mean, I'd seen the Dead earlier in the year. And, obviously a longer show, and a lot of the shows I was going at were just a standard, hour. But it just, the thing I left there with was, wow, this was like an event. It was just more than a concert. It was a life experience.
What was your most recent show, and what did you think of it?
It was 7/16/2017, Northerly Island, and that's a long time ago in Phish years. But for me, when the second hiatus came, it was kind of the perfect storm of, I got married, I had a kid, life threw us some curveballs with some complications and stuff, and eventually, Phish took a back seat, and when they came back, I kind of forced it to be a back seat, because it needed to be. And for me, that was like, well, I had to end the obsession and not let the obsession come back. But gradually, it snuck back in, and I'm very happy for it. But it's few and far between that we get to see shows. So for me, every show that I go to, I don't complain anymore. I used to complain a lot. Like, oh, I've heard this like 4 times this tour. Nowadays, it's like just hearing anything is fantastic.
I have a feeling a lot of people who have seen them for a long while feel similarly. I think a lot of people have had, if not the same, at least a similar experience as you, where it was all obsessive, all encompassing. The breakup gave us time to either explore or develop different priorities, or life just kind of happened for a lot of us, and then when they came back, either depending on each person's life circumstances, they were able to pick up where they left off, or maybe it was kind of like putting it a little bit more in perspective, where I'll see Phish when I can, but I have a different kind of life now. I remember when they came back at Hampton, I was able to go to one of those 3 comeback shows in 2009. And I went to there was like a poster show at one of the hotels near the venue.
Yeah.
And when you walked in, the people at the front desk gave you a little name tag. It said, "Hello, my name is," and you wrote your name, but underneath it said, "Since Coventry, I've," and it really said a lot.
Yeah, it does.
I got to write, "I became a teacher." And that was, in like a few words, it really enveloped a 5-period important developmental time for pretty much any fan who was there.
Yeah, no, I agree.
If you had to pick one tour and you couldn't go to the other 2 in a given year, would you do the summer tour, the fall tour, or the New Year's run?
It's a tough call, because all of them have, awesome parts of them that you can't take away from each one. But for me, summer tour is something, I still equate with Phish, and especially living in Chicago, I've got like this rite of passage every May or June, whenever the weather actually starts to turn around here, to just rolling down the windows and cranking Phish and the Dead, and it just reminds me of my youth. And so summer tour, I love outdoor shows. But fall tour itself is really different. I think the tone is different. It's very dark, or it can be very dark, and lead to different musical encounters because of that. And New Year's Eve is just New Year's Eve. Right? It's always amazing, especially at MSG.
I also wanted to ask you, this is more of an off-the-cuff question. I've been to Chicago a number of times, but never to see live music, except for Fare Thee Well. Never to see a Phish show, I guess, is a fairer way to put it. And there seem to be a million different concert venues that sprawl throughout the entire city. What is your favorite, all things considered?
And honestly, we don't have a very good venue. For
Really?
being such a monster city, for being like the third largest city in the country, I don't feel like we have a fantastic venue to see a show. We've got Northerly Island, which they turned into, but it's really just a flat area that it's more of like a festival type of thing. It's not a great place to see a show. The skyline's awesome, but the actual venue itself is not. Like I said, Tinley Park's relatively horrible. I think kind of, Chicagoans in their arrogance adopt Alpine as something because it's so close. But really, I mean, I don't know if I have an exact favorite, you know.
I've heard people say that UIC Pavilion is a pretty great place to see a show.
Yeah, and I've seen so many shows there, and it is a great place. It's a nice venue. It's intimate. There's not really a bad seat in the house. Phish has played some unbelievable shows there. But nothing that like it's nothing like, man, I got to go to Chicago. Like if you ask the person where do you want to see a show, they wouldn't be like, you got to go to UIC. Like it's that's like got to go to Red Rocks, got to go to the Gorge, got to I mean, it's just I feel like we don't have it, and that's unfortunate.
Well, for baseball, you've got Wrigley, and that trumps it all, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I love Chicago, but speaking of venues, what is your favorite spot in the venue to see a show? If you had your pick, where would you be?
I got to be far enough back to really get the full Corona experience. I like being up front. Like I've seen, shows, first, second row that I got lucky enough to get some mail order. I've watched Trey Jewell on himself when he's been in the groove, but I really like being far back, especially now as opposed to like shows from '90s and stuff. The lights are always fantastic, but what he does now at shows is just a truly unique experience. And you have to, for me, I have to be back to see it.
You see SOAM on a set list. Is it Split Open and Melt or Scent of a Mule?
It's Split Open and Melt because it's the original. It was your first. You can't bully it out of its way.
It's got dibs.
It's got dibs. I like Scent of a Mule. I like them equally. Well, no, I don't. I like more. But in all honesty, you can't take it away.
What's a venue that you've never been to, but you would love to go see a show?
Definitely the Gorge. I've been to a lot of the venues that people, at least in the country, that people consider fantastic. But I had tickets in '98 to go the entire West Coast run down from the Gorge, and I couldn't go. I had to sell them to a buddy at the last minute, and I've never really had a chance to go back. So it's something I've got on my bucket list for sure.
All right, well, I'm sure you'll have opportunities in the future. I'm crossing my fingers for you. And finally, what is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
The weirdest thing I've seen, I've seen stuff that you would consider weird, but the thing that stuck out the most to me was we were in the lawn after the first set of 8/13/96 at Deer Creek. And I can't remember if we were within this area or right next to it, but a group of like a circle of like 20 to 30 people got up and like had this orchestrated, go to the Democratic National Convention moment where they were trying to get everyone in the lawn to go to the Democratic National Convention. And, it was just like we were warped back into the 60s, we were all wondering, like, what is going on? It's just an interesting moment. I don't know how many people they got to go, but, it was just up the road in Chicago that year. I did not attend.
Was it Chicago in '68? What was it?
Yeah. So, that's the one, the major moment that you equate with protesting. But I don't even remember any, other than, standard government stuff. I don't remember any, major protests during the '96.
No, I don't either. I wasn't that old yet. I was only 14, but I remember it being pretty smooth and even across the board for my 14-year-old understanding of politics.
Yep, exactly.
When was this show played?
The Fall 97 tour, also known as Phish Destroys America, is arguably, I would say almost certainly, their best known and most widely heralded, and maybe their most transformative year stylistically. In broad strokes, the band capitalized on their Winter 97 European tour, and they played in small venues compared to the arenas that they broke into over the course of 1995 and 1996. And they very consciously, it seemed, that, and it was encapsulated on Slip, Stitch, and Pass, that show from Germany, they played slower. And that's not it, but that was, I think, the most obvious change. They played at slower tempos. They wrote music that kind of explored the space in between, where Fishman focused a little more on the cowbells. They had interlocking vocal rounds where it wasn't just one singer with backup parts. They were like almost not just segues, but fugues, I think they were, between each other vocally. Songs like Twist, Water in the Sky, Dirt, Ghost, of course. Black Eyed Katie also was slower. I mean, the Proto Mama Dance. And in the Phish book by Richard Gere, it was also mentioned that they practiced to recordings of the meters. And I remember, I think it was Fishman who said that they would press play on a meters album, turn the volume all the way down. They would start playing along to it, and then they would turn the volume back up, and they would never be able to slow down as much as the meters. So they were consciously making an effort to make things a little bit more easygoing and flow centric compared to like supersonic, crazy abstract rock that we're used to in the mid 90s.
Yeah, I think that's, that definitely speaks to what they were trying to do. I would think, everyone loves like, the Machine Gun Kelly and that fierceness that was the early years. But I would imagine as a musician, want to evolve, you want to have growth and stuff, and they pretty much mastered where they were. So for me, it was kind of like a step back, like you're saying, of this is what I want. This is a direction that I'd like to explore musically that we really haven't. So yeah, I think that falls in line perfectly.
Let's look at the route of the tour specifically. So it began on November 13th, 97 in Las Vegas, quickly made its way east, and it ended exactly a month later in a 2-night run on December 12th and 13th in Albany. And normally at this point of the show, I list some of the better known shows from any given tour that the guest chooses. But in this case, I would have to list, I think, everything.
Yeah, it was a fantastic tour. Unfortunately for us, it was a quick run through the Midwest, so it was tough to get to shows, but we had a few, and all of them were fantastic.
What shows did you hit in addition to today's in Ohio?
I went to University of Illinois Champaign because that was close to us, and then we jumped in the car and went to Cleveland. I think that was the 5th, and then we skipped the 6th, which sounds crazy, and actually
in retrospect, maybe
in retrospect, and even the next day when we met up friends that didn't skip the 5th, but we did have friends down in Dayton, so we just went directly down to Dayton to hang out.
And how far is that from Chicago?
Dayton itself?
Yeah.
I don't know. At the time I was coming from school, but about the same distance, probably like 5-6 hours. So not a bad drive.
No. The reason I'm asking is because I grew up exclusively in the Northeast, like in New York, not in New York City, but close enough.
Everything's within an hour.
Yeah, or two. And it wasn't a big deal, like to go to Philly for a show or two and then go up to Albany in 2 nights later. And of course, New York City itself or Hartford, like everything is pretty simple to get to when they play that area of the nation. So when I talk to people from different regions of the country, I'm always interested what their radius is. Phish is playing within X number of miles or X number of hours drive. What is the limit for each fan? I'm curious.
We were about, at 10, but I mean, there was always the weekends of, we can get to Vegas this weekend and back. That's what you did when you were in college. But yeah, I mean, we were probably like 5 to 10 anywhere in that radius we were hitting it.
And so to wrap up this idea of the Fall 97 tour, probably an entire podcast could be dedicated just to this tour. Years ago, that great podcast called Long May They Run covered Big Cypress. And anyone listening, if you haven't heard that and you're interested, it's a must listen. And Phish Destroys America, I think, kind of is almost equal in terms of legacy and history importance of the band's career. For me, some ideas when I think fall 97, just immediate word association, like taboo, like words you couldn't say if the keyword was fall 97, would be Phish Destroys America, the phrase Cal Funk, the Denver Ghost, and today's show, the Dayton Tube, obviously stands above, and the Worcester Runaway Gym. Too many more to mention. So you mentioned that you were in college. Where were you in the fall of 97? Like, what was your life like that led you to this show?
Yeah, I was at Illinois State University. There was a really good group of fans that were there. A lot of us are still friends today. And so that's where we were, which is kind of like the middle of Illinois. So we could get to places like St. Louis and other places relatively easily. But yeah, that was our location. And like I said, we had a great group of friends there. It was a great experience to really have that unique group of people and just have a love for this band.
And how deep into it were you? Because you had been seeing them at this point for about 4 years, if your first show is 1993. And you said going into your first show, you knew about them, but you weren't, I don't know if you'd be ready to talk about them on a podcast if those existed. No, but how far deep were you into by now, by 97?
Oh, I was really deep into it. The next year in 98, I started taping. It was full-blown obsession. I think 98 and 99 were probably my craziest years of trying to get to every show. I think that's something that taping does to you too, which is eventually why I stopped that. Mm-hmm. Part of it is, once you start taping, it's like, well, I'm going to go to this show too. Oh, this little band's playing here. I'm going to go to this too. It becomes like a lifestyle. But you do try to get to, as many shows as possible. But yeah, I'd say 95 to 2000 was just pure Phish.
I'm curious about what you just said about taping and the lifestyle of being a taper, because I don't think I've had anyone, even if they had taped shows, that really addressed that on this show yet. When you said that, is it, because the way I feel about this podcast is it's a lot of work, but in the end, I love speaking to fans about their different experiences and different perspectives, because it's about a topic that I personally, I'm always interested in. But it is a lot of work and it's a labor of love. Sure. And I don't get paid to do this. I make zero income. If anything, this is a very expensive hobby, running a podcast. So do you feel, am I right to think that the mindset of a taper is similar, that you like the idea of contributing and you just kind of like the logistics of getting it together?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's like you said, it's an expensive hobby. It's really something. It's interesting because, you're just trying to capture, something that that means so much to you. But one of my big things was when I started with Phish, I didn't know a whole lot about them, and then I found out about the tape scene. And I wish I remembered this guy's name, but I sent like 60 tapes to a guy out in Boston, and he just, I had no tapes. I had like nothing of value for him. Just said, send me whatever you want, and I'll tape some good shows for you. And it was literally like a month later, and in the time of copying cassettes, that's putting in work. You get 60 cassettes back in a month, and I'll never forget like that moment. So like for me, the taping was like, I just want to be able to push this out to the masses.
Right, and never high-speed dumbing, of course.
No, that's illegal.
Yeah, that's a sin, right? On your fingers. No high-speed dubbing.
They all came back, sounded fantastic. So.
Good. And so to wrap this all up before we dig into the show, of all the shows that you've seen from 1993 to 2017 to date, why do you have attendance bias toward this show, December 7th, 97 at I'm just going to call it the Nutter Center. I don't know who Ervin J is, but the Nutter Center in Dayton. Why this show?
Yeah, the Nutter Center, this show particularly was such a, I mean, it's a classic show. Everyone, knows the two, like you said. I don't know if everybody feels the same way about the full show or has given it the listen. But for me, it was just an unbelievable show. They played so well. And then on top of it, like I met two of my lifelong friends at this show. My brother, a couple days after this, told me that he wasn't going to be able to drive us to New Year's Eve. So I was left with tickets to New Year's Eve and for myself and somebody else. And the person that I met in the parking lot that I went to school with, eventually I saw him at a party the next weekend and we talked. And, here we are 2 weeks later driving to New Year's. I didn't even know him. He didn't have a working radio. So we drove 14 hours to New York. And like that was, an immediate best friend, scenario. And I met him at this show. So there's so many like life moments with this show that mean so much to me. And it's the magic of Phish.
Set one.
Set one. The show starts off with AC/DC Bag and then segues perfectly into Psycho Killer. And when I was preparing for this conversation, I almost found it difficult to separate each song in the first set into its own little section because it seems like it flows flawlessly from one song to the next. This is such a beautiful piece of music that if you went to go see a band and they played just this first set, that was their whole performance, I think you could have left satisfied.
Oh, definitely. The thing about it, a bag opener is fantastic. It's a great way to set the pace. And what's interesting to me, and I don't know if I didn't notice it then, but like listening to this and then listening to, the pod that you had on 1230 about that bag, this bag is fast. Like it's meant to get things going. Like the difference between this and the 1231 with tempo is unbelievable. So I always I'm wondering now, like, is every bag opener always that quick? Are they always trying to get everybody on? But this one was really in your face and really quick. And it didn't leave much for the jam portion of it because, like you said, it just kind of immediately transitioned. But it was just a fantastic. You could tell like they were on. Like the sound in the room was unbelievable. I was at the Nutter Center in '95. I don't remember it being like a fantastic sound there at that point. But Paul had it dialed in, and everybody was really even in the mix. Like you could hear everyone.
I agree. And even on the Phish.in mix that I was listening to today for this and yesterday, the first note that I have is first, I love hearing the count off, Trey counting off to start the song. And they are so tight. Like it's a snare drum just has a pop. The whole band does, but the snare drum is what I was able to focus on and zero in. It almost sounds like they're in a small jazz club. How big is the Nutter Center? Is it like 14,000 or so?
It's similar to like UIC. I don't know, probably around 10,000 or so. It's a similar venue to, I honestly can't even think now, but I don't think it has like an upper level. I think it just goes up as far as it can, and then that's it. It does have an upper level. It's very minimal.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. I'm excited to find out because, like you said, the sound on this recording, it almost makes you feel like you are there. And in a different way, for me, it almost felt like a time travel machine.
Yeah.
In that, like, automatically this is 1997 or maybe just fall 1997 when you hear this AC/DC bag opener. And to me, this song in particular, it may be their most common first set opener of their career. That's deserving of a fact check, but it's very emblematic of this fall 97 tour where we've all heard AC/DC bag so many times, but it's the same song, but it's a different tempo, and stylistically it's very different. It's almost like a Borg thing.
Yeah.
It's AC/DC bag is sucked in and it comes out fall 97 cow funkified.
Yep. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. And like you said, there's not a big jam in it. There doesn't need to be, because they're just kind of getting soaked in on getting everyone on board. But there's a great shift, a direct segue into Psycho Killer. I did not see it coming, but in the notes you mentioned that you thought maybe you did.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, I wasn't hugely familiar with the Talking Heads, and again, this is something that Phish does to you. It opens your mind to everything that they present to you. I mean, they just played Remain in Light. So for me, I was like, oh, I'm just going to dive into everything Talking Heads has ever done. And, from that, I became a huge fan. But it was weird because I always wonder, was it planned to go into Psycho Killer? Because it sounds like it was. I mean, for it to go that quickly into it, you would have to think that they had that plan. But at the same time, they didn't really play the full song. Like, it was just like, they didn't really end it. So it was like, was it just like Trey being like, let's do this, or he heard something or somebody heard something, because you hear Gordon hit the bass notes before anybody.
Yeah, he's first.
Yeah, so it's like I always wonder, like, was it planned? It sounds like it has to. I'm going to go with that.
I think that's a fair assumption. I saw them play it once in 2009. It was at Hartford. The date is August 14th. And I think it was out of Ghost. And I don't think they had it planned per se, but I remember it was during the second set when they played Psycho Killer. And during the set break, the Talking Heads were being played over the PA, and the whole crowd was singing along once we all realized that that's the song being played. So the band was aware clearly that it was being played over the PA, but I don't think they went on stage saying, let's play Psycho Killer. But I think they said, you know what, if we find the opportunity, or maybe just it was Trey, I'm going to try and force it. And the opportunity arose and it became real. But like you mentioned about this version from December 7th, 97, it wasn't totally polished. It wasn't rehearsed to be performed. It was kind of like if you could just pick up an instrument and play Guitar Hero with your friends, and all of a sudden you're not perfect at the song, but it's one of your favorites and you could pull it off. That's what happened.
Yeah. And it went into, the jam that came out of it was fantastic as well. You said the whole first set, kind of did that, where it went in and out. There was a moment where I thought it was going into something that I was just unfamiliar with. It's right around like 4.5 minutes or something like that, where Trey was hitting this little staccato like riff, and I remember thinking, what is this? But it's just one of those things that happens at a show where you feel like you're onto something, and then you're like, no, that's nothing. It's just I'm being awesome, and there's so many moments of that where in that particular riff like always stuck out in my mind. Like I would years later, I'd just be like humming it because like it just sticks in your mind of like, oh yeah, I remember that exact moment. There's so many different little moments of the jams like that get stuck in your head as a fan.
Yeah, in this show in particular. And speaking of segues, after Psycho Killer, which again is not very long, as you mentioned, although the jam is very good, they slow down like very, very deliberately and very smoothly. And I think it was Paige who starts it. They get right into Jesus Just Left Chicago, which is perfect.
Yeah.
Did the crowd go nuts? Because you're not right next to Chicago, but you were from there.
Yeah, no, I mean, for us, I always love hearing it. Any reference to my town but yeah, it was a beautiful segue. I mean, it was, they just nailed it. And the version of this is unbelievable. I mean, like the like I said, the playing that they were doing the whole show was really tight. They were really in tune with each other. I think it's a relative. I don't know. I really don't know lengths of Jesus Left Chicago. To tell you the truth, I don't know if it's a long or short one. But it was just perfectly played and a lot of nice space for everyone to create in it too. It wasn't just driven by one person. Everyone the ability to show off a bit and really lay down some.
And that's an essence of this era, right? A lot of teamwork, a lot of band interplay where no one person dominates, although some people have better nights than others, depending on the show. Like tonight, I would argue this show, the 7th, is Paige's night. I think that's a recurring motif.
Yeah, he drove a lot of the jams, it seemed like to me, for this night, and which is interesting because that wasn't something that I was that used to, I guess.
It's super fun. The first time I heard Phish play Jesus Left Chicago, at least not live, but on recording, was my tape of Halloween 95. It was, I think, in the third set after Quadrophenia, and that was at Rosemont Horizon. Yeah,
that was my brother's first show. My mom stood in line at Ticketmaster and got the first ticket in the lottery, and we ended up getting 4th row for that show.
Wow.
It was a mind-blowing experience. I wasn't a huge Who fan, but I learned a lot that night. But when they play it in Chicago, it's even more, it's even got more. But the crowd was going nuts at the Nutter Center for this one.
Rightfully so. After Jesus Left Chicago, they played My Mind's Got a Mind of Its Own, which is a really fun bluegrass cover, but Leave It to Phish, I thought, to quote, cool down with a really upbeat bluegrass song.
Yeah, exactly. I have a huge love for all of those little bluegrass songs. They play them so well. The fact that they can just migrate from genre to genre to genre is it just shows you how amazing they are as musicians. It's a fantastic song with fun lyrics for sure.
And to the crowd's credit, they hang in with all those genre changes. This is a time before Spotify, before YouTube, before everything is readily accessible with a simple search on a device in your pocket, because Phish, I would argue, introduced a lot of us, at least speaking for myself. And I imagine you had a similar experience based on your discussion of the Talking Heads. Phish probably introduced us not only to bands, but entire genres. How many people got into bluegrass or maybe blues with Jesus Left Chicago because of a Phish cover?
Yeah, it's funny because I knew nothing about bluegrass, and I remember at one time my dad, coming up to me, hey, you heard she's bluegrass cover of Gin and Juice, which was like some completely false statement of a bluegrass band that covered Dogs Gin and Juice, but it was going around that it was Phish, on the internet, of course. But he thought like, oh, that probably is Phish.
It's plausible, if not accurate,
because they could play anything, and they really do. They introduce you to bands and styles of music that, like you think of, this was more just a trained Dave thing, but the fact that they went over to Africa and I learned a whole lot about Orchestra Baobab, like just because of that. That was cool. That led me into other things like and Tommy Fruity and like. Different music over there. It's like I know all of this stuff, and it all comes back to my love of Phish.
The next segment, I'm going to leave entirely up to you because judging by the notes, this seemed like a major highlight for you. You and I haven't spoken about this face to face yet, so I'm excited to hear just your raw thoughts on what starts as It's Ice, but it really ends up as It's Ice into Swept Away, Steep, and then closes back again with It's Ice, like a It's Ice sandwich with Swept Away and Steep. So I loved it, but you tell me what you thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like, I mean, I don't know if there's any fantastic versions of Sweet, Swept Away and Steep. Ice is always welcome in my book. I love it. It's a great song, especially when it's played well, and it was that night. But for me, it was like, that's like the type of moments I think, and I said in the notes that like Phish is comparable to like a masterful athlete, like Michael Jordan or Steph Curry or whatever another analogy you want to present, but they're very good every single night. And then there's nights where you're just like, wow, they play so well. Their execution is so fantastic that you just kind of sit there and like are in awe of their ability to play. And I think for me, like this kind of gets overlooked in this show because it just seems that those songs seem to flow naturally together. And they've really never been presented that way. It's not like this is like, hey, this is a Mike's Groove, this is, but it just, for me, it kind of like caught me by like, wow, this is a really good group of songs to run through together.
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense it's not so much about the jam or the performance of each song individually, because taken piece by piece, there's nothing truly noteworthy, but put them all together and it's fabulous. It's pristine as a suite almost.
Yeah, exactly.
The performance justifies itself. The order of it is brilliant. If you haven't heard this, anyone listening, definitely call it up on Phish.in or re-listen app and check out. I mean, the whole show is incredible, but this suite of It's Ice, Swept Away, Steep, back into It's Ice is a perfect first set sandwich. And next up is Theme from the Bottom, which another song that wasn't written for this tour, debuted in 1995, but I think it found a peak in 1997. I would argue the same a little later for Wolfman's Brother, right? A song that wasn't written recently at the time of this show, but flowered during this era. Yeah. And there are great jammed versions of the song, and it somehow, maybe you could help me out with this, it suits this funky style, even though it's not a funk song by any stretch.
Yeah, I think it does. It's interesting. Theme and Taste were, in my opinion, played so heavily in '96 when they were coming into their own, and they were trying to work out like what are we doing here with this, and but I do agree, like '97 was a year for Theme, and this is a great version of it. The reason that it fits in is because it's not a one person type of jam. It's a sonic movement towards the end of all of them going together. So I think it kind of fits that time period of we're all in this together. Nobody's taking the lead, but we're all interweaving in and out. And so I think that's why it kind of, when they were able to slow it down and set into that groove, I think that's why it fits this era.
Yeah, that's a well thought out way to put it. I hadn't really considered that. Like we were discussing before, the new batch of songs that were more in interdependence of the band members as opposed to one driving member. I guess Theme from the Bottom really does have that as a primary factor of it as a song. And then next is like I said earlier, the only reason I knew this show before I listened to it at your suggestion is Tube. And Phish.net lists it as, quote, the first tube to break out of the box.
Yeah, this is, I mean, it is the Tube show for a lot of people, and with good reason. My buddy that I was with, one of the guys I was with at the show, is a huge Tube fan. I mean, it's probably his favorite song, at least at the time was. So immediately, I love it too, but I was so happy for him without knowing what was, going to take place. But again, they played this night so well that they were all very on. But the difference with this Tube is, like you said, I mean, obviously, them jamming it out. But this is where, I mean, Page really drove, a lot of this. It was clear that they absolutely loved what they were doing. Like they almost didn't want to leave. I think that's what eventually led them to just picking it up again after the song was over, was because, there was that hesitation of, do we even finish this off? Do we go into the blues frame of the song? Do we leave what we've created here? And that's what's kind of made this really, really special. And, the jam after it.
Well, yeah, on Phish.in, it's listed as Tube and then Tube Jam right after, even though it's all the same song. I recently had a conversation with a guest about Susie Greenberg from September 14th, 2000. It closed the first set and they played Susie Greenberg, a perfectly acceptable, about 4.5 or 5 minute version. But then they go back into the jam, the 1 or 2 chord progression. I had the same exact feeling from this Tube, that they played the whole song and no one would complain about Tube if they just left it as it was, but they weren't done with it. You said they were so fired up. They just didn't want to let it go. It wasn't time to end. They knew they had more in them and they figured, what the fuck? Why not? Let's just keep it going. And I think that's what puts it over the top for a lot of people.
Yeah, I didn't know about that Susie Greenberg, or at least didn't remember it until I heard the pod and I went back and listened to it. It is similar. I think it was just like, they wanted to get back into that groove. It was so nice and thick. And, I mean, it wasn't even like, hey, the stuff Page was doing, driving was amazing. But, everyone was just content with just being in that thick, beautiful zone. And you could just tell they go back into it. And that's what made the Tube show, is that the fact that they go back into it, for only a couple minutes. It's not long, and again, I think at some point I thought I heard them going into Cross-Eyed and Painless. And it's just, I mean, it's not like the whole band. I think it was like Trey was like maybe trying to push people to it or something. Like it's just for like a 15-second, like just very similar, da, 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 da.
Yeah.
Just like maybe, man. But I also thought like, man, maybe it's just me wanting that to happen. But then really, like you can hear, like he hits like Trey hits the opening chord of Slave in the jam. Before they migrate into it, even before the tempo slows really. But for me, I always thought like, oh, like when you hear that first chord, it sticks in your head. So for me, I thought, oh, maybe, Slave is one of my favorite songs. So
For sure. I thought it was lovely. And it ended, like you just said, the set did, and the segue went into Slave to the Traffic Light, which is a quick version of it. The jam is, It takes its time. The build is as good as any other, but the composed section is very quick. I think the whole song is over at 4 minutes. I don't know why I wrote this. I have a feeling that the lights did a lot for this jam. I don't know what I meant. And I wrote that.
Yeah, I think, there's certain moments of lights that I just feel like are really the area. And I think it's like Slave and for me, Reba, in those slow build moments, those lights really are like, you're able to take a breath from what's happened. And you're able to just like, fully encapsulate yourself in the experience. And I think the lights draw you in even more in those types of environments. And it was like I said, I'm a huge Slave fan. It's not a one that blows anything out of the water. It's just a good solid version that ended the first set that was something to behold for sure.
And I've used to ask this question in my earlier episodes, and the answer always was, I don't remember. So I'm going to try one more time. Do you remember what it was like at set break during this show?
I do. I remember it because I have a crazy story from set break.
Okay.
My buddy went backstage at the UIC show earlier in the tour. He got it from his music teacher. I'm not entirely sure how. But he gave me the pass when he knew I was going to Ohio. And, being the young, dumb idiot that I was so pumped after that first set that I was like, I'm just going to go backstage. So I walk up on the left side, pitch side of the stage. There was like a college security kid, there. Doesn't even bat an eye, just like, oh, yeah, he's got a pass. Let's go. I actually walked around the stage, went through the double doors. And like in my head, like I didn't have a plan. Like I wasn't like, what was I gonna do? Be like, hey, good job, guys. Let's do more in set two. Like what if I did get backstage? It would have been really, really awkward and odd because nobody goes backstage during set break. But I ran into who I later got to know as Bart, the head of their security. Almost right when I got through the double doors, and he it was like seamless. I wish we had cell phones back then, and somebody was recording, because it was like he saw me, he saw the pass, he was like, "That's not from tonight." Took it off. It was like one perfect swoop, and then escorted me out of the backstage area, which in hindsight probably for the best, because it would have been a very awkward encounter. So that's why I remember the set break from that show particularly. Usually I wouldn't remember them.
Set 2.
Set 2 opens with Timber Ho, and I remember when I was first getting into Phish, and they played this song regularly, if not commonly. It was something of a rarity, but not a insane to hear. They played it for a decent amount in 1997. And then after 97, it kind of went away for a long, long while until they came back really in 2009. And I always thought of this as a jam classic, that when they play Timber Ho, you better buckle up. Something crazy is about to happen. I wonder if this is the tour, or maybe this and the previous version kind of made it a legend. Did you know this song when you went to when they played it here?
Yeah, I mean, I did. I know it wasn't my first one, but I know that I really, really enjoyed it. Because it's so dark and, like I said, indoor show, it just leads to like dark places. It's kind of like Carini-esque with the fact that it's these like dissonant, minor type of notes that just inherently leads you to like a very dark, spacey place. And I think this was a fantastic version of it. Usually, like you said, this is a jam oriented song. Usually, this leads into a run of songs or something like that. It's a good set opener, but it usually never comes back to finish up. But this version did, and it wasn't surprising to me at the time, but it is surprising to me now.
I like that corollary that you just mentioned, or comparison of Timber Ho being the Carini of the time. Even though Carini had been written, It hadn't really found its place yet. They weren't done organizing the lyrics and the order of it. It hadn't found its tone fully yet. Carini hadn't. But Timber Ho, I agree with you, definitely occupied that space where if you want a good second set opening, dark, mindless in its way, maybe repetitive a little bit, noodling, spacey darkness in it. I keep using the word dark. It was one of the first words I wrote in our notes for this jam.
Yeah.
This did the job.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's a dark song. It leads them into directions that they generally haven't played over the course of the night. It's like Bowie does that a little bit, if they want it to, but this song, it's almost like it has to go there. They're just, that's the way it's built.
And they follow that up with Wolfman's Brother, which I thought was awesome. Every time I see Wolfman's Brother on the set list from 1997 forward, I get excited because even though it was written for 1994, I think they played it the most in 94. And then 97 was kind of its coming out party, again, heralding back to that March 1st, 97 show in Germany for Slip, Stitch, and Pass. The song that when we discussed earlier about the consciously slowing down, I think Wolfman's is the textbook example of that.
I agree. This is, Wolfman's in 97 was just revitalized. The version on Slip, Stitch, and Pass is just beautiful. There's not even being at the show, there's moments of that version that stick in my head, like that are just like, wow, So, immediately when they started it, the crowd went nuts. This 97 being so, being such a heavily European toured season, I think a lot of people were, listening to those shows. They were acquiring them. They were, because, there was a drought of you actually seeing Phish. And so I think, that's why a lot of people were extremely excited about it, because they had heard so many of the new versions of this, and obviously stuff that past helps, but they knew that this was going to be a good time immediately.
After Wolfman's, they played Boogie on Reggae Woman, which is always a crowd favorite. And I saw on Phish.net that this is the first, I didn't know this. This was the first Boogie on since September 13th, 1988. 988 shows.
Yeah.
When you brought up the show from Madison Square Garden on December 30th of 97, they played Sneakin' Sally Through the Alley for the first time in like 902 shows. So I didn't realize it had been preceded by a bust out of this magnitude. This must have been great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the time, I didn't realize that they had even played it before. And I also felt like really bad about it because, well, I mean, not at the moment, but I grew up in a Beatles and Motown home. So Stevie Wonder was something that was played consistently, and I just was not familiar with it. But again, it's something that Phish does for you. I was familiar with a lot of Stevie Wonder, but this, I mean, how can you not like this song? And it's just immediately puts you into a good mood. They had a great time with it. It's not as polished as the ones that they played a couple times after that. Even in New York later in the month. I think they played it on 97, right? The New Year's run.
Maybe. I don't remember.
I don't know. I could be wrong.
I think I've been, I had Scott Marks, the guy who helps out a lot with set lists on Phish.net. And whenever you see a tease listed, he's one of the people that helps decide that.
Yeah.
And You Enjoy Myself on my first show, December 29th, 97. In my opinion, Mike Gordon plays a pristine, obvious tease of Boogie on Reggae Woman. And I've been petitioning him on Twitter for years to add it, but for some reason it's not there. So I don't know if they played the full song in that holiday run, but at least one band member played one lick from it. That I could say with certainty.
Well, good luck with that. But no, it wasn't a fantastic version. I mean, there was some rust on it, obviously, after nearly 1,000 shows. But it was just, I mean, it was incredible to hear it. I mean, especially after, you start with Timber and then Wolfman's gets everybody going, and then just to keep the party going, out of Wolfman's and right into Boogie On, it was just like, wow, what a great feeling.
And talking about keeping the party going, next up was Reba, which to me, when I was listening to this set, forget the whole show, but just the sequence that you just mentioned, when your team gets a couple of base runners on and you might score one or two runs and leave the bases loaded, this Reba is the grand slam. It just busts the game wide open. Now you're winning 8-0 as opposed to 3-0 as you were, a couple batters ago. The Boogie On just suddenly stops too. This isn't quite a segue. It's just kind of like pause play. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and it's a fantastic version of Reba. Because like I was saying, because everyone is so nice in the mix here, you really get to hear like Mike come out and shine. And the composed portion of Reba, I am addicted to Fishman. Like I hardly hear anybody else when I'm at a show that Reba's playing during the composed portion, because he's so masterful with what he does, that I just can't take my ears off. And so this is no exception here. He really laid it down. The whole band did, but it's not an unbelievable like, oh, you've got to hear this Reba. But there's some moments in it, especially with Trey towards the end and during that build section, that is really, really, you can tell they're really fully into it.
Definitely. I wrote down at around 11 page presence at 11 minutes, and then Trey makes it, quote, extremely blissful at 11:20, just 20 seconds later. And this is, I wrote in capital letters, the good stuff for Reba.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And no whistle, which
Yep.
is fine. I always like a whistle. This was a song that I got my little cousin singing. I think my kids also sang it when they were little. It's just a song that goes well with the youth of being able to sing, Reba Bag It Faggot. And so like anytime I hear it now, I think about that. And at this point, I was definitely not thinking about it. I was just thinking about how good of a job they did that night.
Well, that's what's so great about sticking with Phish for so long. We talked earlier about switching around the priority that we put toward them or that they mean for us. Of course, that's life. But they don't, I mean, they change, but the songs don't necessarily change, but we do. And our associations with them do. So they mean different things to us at different points in our lives. And that's really sweet.
Yeah, it's true.
Next up is Gaiuti, which I wrote the hits just keep on coming. It's standard and flawless.
Yeah, and that says a lot. I mean, there's a lot of Gaiutis that have flubs. It's a technically difficult song, I would imagine, for everyone to play perfectly consistent, even though that happens a lot. But yeah, it doesn't really stick out as anything but a high energy, just perfect version of the song.
Yeah, I described it once Gaiute showed up. I described it as a murderous set list.
Yeah.
And no ending to, I mean, there is an ending to it, of course, but no ending to that vibe because they closed the whole thing with Possum, which is not a usual set closer.
Yeah. It's a fairly long version of it, I think. Not too long, but it's a slightly extended version.
And it opens with a unique sort of beginning. We all know the Possum intro, where it's 16th notes over and over and over again until they bust open into the regular chord progression. This one has kind of a slow and funky intro that it almost sounds a little bit more like Camel Walk than it does Possum.
Yeah, you can tell, when it started, Trey backed off his normal riffs, and then, eventually that led into the charge type of, dun, 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 which was reoccurring throughout the entire version. And so, it put a different tone on it for sure. It didn't have that explosiveness in the beginning, but it was a fantastic version, and interesting to see how they kind of shaped it with just the way that they were playing for them.
Yeah, and you said earlier about the Trey Machine Gun Trey, that everyone loves Machine Gun Trey. And 97, the Reader's Digest version of it is Slow Down into Cowfunk. But let us not forget that, Machine Gun Trey didn't quite go anywhere. He just might have taken a back seat, but still there. Yeah. And he's showing up during Possum.
Yeah, he still came out, he still had it. And it's definitely evident here. I mean, it was, there were some moments in this though that, it was really nice to hear, Page going for it. And it was a great version and a fantastic way to end the show.
And the show's not quite over, though, with an encore, a simple one. But you mentioned that you grew up in a Beatles and Motown household. So you must have been really happy to hear the encore of A Day in a Life.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to end the show. One song set, close or encore really didn't have to do much more. I mean, they could have walked out on stage. They could have waved to the crowd and said, "Thanks for coming," and we would have walked out and been happy. But to get, a really good version of a day in the life, where anytime they culminate, and are able to just blow it up at the end, you walk out of there happy.
So Eric Creighton, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about this. I don't know about underrated, but maybe underknown show where it's weird because I think everyone knows 12/7/97. Everyone knows Tube from 12/7/97 in Dayton, but I don't know if as many fans are as fully aware of just how many highlights there were during this show. It was really wonderful to hear not only your breakdown of the song by song, but also your overall experience of what it was like to see Phish in 97 in the Midwest at this point. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your part.
Brian, thanks for having me on. Honestly, this is a blast. Anytime that I can talk about Phish for an hour is a good time to me. I would encourage anybody that's thinking about it to do it. It's been nothing but fun. So I truly appreciate the opportunity here.
And that's it for today's episode and my conversation with Eric Creighton of Illinois about December 7th, 1997 at Dayton, Ohio. But before we get out of here, it is time to just double check our facts and figures with the attendance bias fact check.
Attendance bias fact check.
Eric's first Phish show was at Tinley Park on August 14th, 1993. We brought up Run Like an Antelope from that show that weaved in and out of the entire set list. Well, maybe not the entire set list, because for the record, the second set went 2001, Antelope, into Sparks, Walk Away, back into Antelope, Mound, The Squirming Coil, Daniel Saw the Stone, You Enjoy Myself, Purple Rain, Hold Your Head Up, and then closed with Golgi Apparatus. It's definitely one of the best Phish shows of its era, and it was eventually released as Live Phish number 7. During a short tangent, Eric and I brought up the 1968 Chicago Democratic National Convention. During that summer, thousands of counterculture and anti-Vietnam protesters came to Chicago during the convention. Chicago Mayor at the time, Richard Daley, refused to grant the protesters a legal permit for a peaceful protest. Instead, he called in the National Guard. Predictably, there were violent clashes between the police and the protesters, which were broadcast on network TV nationwide. The event led to the catchphrase, "The whole world is watching." When discussing Phish's 1997 European tour and the live album Slip, Stitch, and Pass, I repeatedly brought up Phish's, quote, show from Germany that was recorded for the live album. That show was played on March 1st, 1997 at the Markthal in Hamburg, Germany. The album is wonderful and the whole show is fantastic. If you've never heard March 1st, 97, check it out on Phish.in. It is available as a soundboard. The Ervin J. Nutter Center, for the record, has a capacity for concerts of 10,400 people. I could not find the most updated statistics about AC/DC bag openers, but from 2009 to 2015 at least, AC/DC bag was the most common song to open a first set. According to an infographic I found on Reddit, only the hardest fact checks here, the most common song to open a first set or a second set from 1987 to 2018 is Choctaws Torture. When talking about Timber Hoe, I kind of got tripped up on my own tongue regarding how often it was played that year. For the record, Timber Hoe was played 8 times in 1997. I mentioned that this version and the previous time they played it helped make it a legend as a jam vehicle. That previous time they played it was November 28th, 1997 at the Worcester Centrum. That show, in turn, was featured on Attendance Bias by award-winning Attendance Bias guest Chris Casey. Upon further inspection, Phish did not play Boogie on Reggae Woman during the 1997 New Year's Eve run, despite Mike Gordon's space tease of it during the December 29th, 97 You Enjoy Myself. And that's it for today's episode of Attendance Bias. I'd like to thank Eric Creighton for joining me today, Phish.net for their help with the fact check and the set lists, and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review of it on your favorite podcast app. And follow Attendance Bias on social media. I'm mostly active on Instagram and Twitter. Reach out and say hello, and I'll send you a free sticker. Thank you again so much for listening, and I'll see you next week on Attendance Bias.